That is good news. But also, if we look in terms of the budget deficit, it's expected to come down to 3.2 from 4.9. Those are all good news. And infrastructure spending is supposed to double, or expected to double, from 66 billion to about 112 billion in 2026. But the bad thing, which you just mentioned there, is the GDP numbers, which are really coming down. So the expectation now is 1.4 for next year, from 1.9, coming down from 2.1, which was the expected value, to 1.9. Now, 2023, the expectation is 1.4 before it starts climbing back to 1.8. So that really shows that obviously the economy is not producing as much as it should.
These are not honestly favorable conditions for our economic goals. But then if we come to the SOEs, there's been much debate around whether government should continue to fund. But if we look at Eskom, their commitment now is to perhaps relieve that debt burden by a maximum of 2/3. What did you make of that decision to at least allow Eskom to focus on its investment capital and just plant productivity?
Well, I think that's the wrong perspective when people think that by government taking over, whether it's 2/3 or a third of Eskom debt, which is about 500 billion, 400 to 500 billion, that allows Eskom to focus on its key functionaries. So for me, I think Eskom needs to be able to say, how can it generate electricity, supply electricity, to make sure that it's profitable, or at least it does not put strain on the government fiscus. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that Eskom is run like any other entity, even if it is really not for profit, but at least it should be able to break even, to ensure that whatever it collects is able to pay for its expansion and maintenance. Remember that debt still goes to government, and government basically is just collecting money from taxpayers, in particular personal income tax, which contributes about 40% of the total revenue government collects. But if the jobs are not being created, it means that collection is going to go down with time. So what we want to do is that it's a short-term relief for Eskom, but I think we want a sustainable solution or plan for Eskom to be able to sustain itself.
Because it most certainly is a critical component to our economy. But then if we move to SANRAL, it seems that funding impasse has now been resolved. Treasury will take 70% and Gauteng to take 30%. But the big question now is around the funding modalities for the 201-kilometer stretch of the road. What would you propose to be those funding modalities? Because many now are worried that, good and well, they've managed to resolve this aspect, but it's going to come to us as a province. So what would be the funding modalities that would be the low-hanging fruits?
So it's not resolved, really, as far as I'm concerned, purely because the public, the consumers, the citizens are still going to pay for it. Okay, so it was really wrong planning, less consultation in the beginning for us to have the e-tolls, which basically Gauteng residents or citizens are rejected, and that's how IOTA was formed. Remember, they were just against the e-tolling. Okay?
Yes.
The fact that governments have transferred 237 billion to SANRAL to be able to cover that, where does government get the money from? So that infrastructure basically, or that money spent, is money misallocated. It should have gone to hospitals in the beginning. We have had two big blunders since 1994. The first one was the arms deal. Instead of building hospitals and other infrastructure, we went into that when we did not have a threat. Then obviously the e-toll was basically less consultation, and hence there was a public outcry, both from the trade unions and people. So that money basically is supposed to be spent in education, health, and other stuff. So we still basically losers into that, because you have to pay the people who did the construction, even if it's not being used.
SANRAL is the winner in all of this. But
SANRAL is the winner.
But also one could say the residents of Gauteng. But just if we are to establish what the funding modality will be. So as an economist, though, what would you perhaps advise the Gauteng government to do? What would be a way to generate that income to maintain that road?
Also, one of the key issues is really just the fuel levy. And for me, the different ways, they can collect that money, apart from just putting onto the fuel levy. If they put it anyway, basically in the fuel levy, it goes to people who don't have cars. But I think when motorists go and kind of renew their licenses, they can just add a little bit of that in terms, because motorists are the people basically that use the roads, so that the public who use public transport don't get hammered if we add on to the fuel levy, as it has been the case, where some of the collection or the recovery comes from the fuel levy. I think that they just need to make sure that they add on to our annual renewal licenses.
Did you get a sense, though, holistically, that the policy statement from yesterday really appreciated the economic situation? Because many were saying what we're going to hear is Treasury's perception of the issues right now. They did go on to address the 350 grant. It was Eskom, even Denel was prioritized, all of these. Do you get a sense that they fully are on top of the situations currently now?
No. Okay. So basically, as I said to you, it was the good read to just say that inflation might be contained and there might be, additional infrastructure spending, but it's not specified. Yes, we'll get that in February next year. But I think the real issue really is that how are they going to create jobs? Because there's that disconnect. Because if the economy is shrinking, it means it's creating less jobs, right? Okay. And if you look in terms of also where is the tax being collected, it's being collected mainly from the financial sector rather than from mining or manufacturing. Manufacturing is actually lagging mining. So when the corporate tax reduces purely because the bumper profits we had in the last few years are going, and because of also Eskom, so there's less production. It means we might end up collecting less than we should have been collecting. So I think we're not out of the woods yet. We need to make sure that there's a lot of focus on job creation. There's a lot of focus to say, how do we certainly manage the economy rather than to just squeeze workers. You see that public sector wage agreement is stuck at about 3%, which the workers are not happy with, below the lower upper target of inflation. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and the budgets really almost remain the same over the years. We pretty much know what they're going to talk about, but there's not concrete evidence how we're going to create jobs. It's only jobs, research and development. If money is put into R&D and we know the specifics to be able to get our scientists and our young graduates into the job market, then we can start saying we are going somewhere.
Mr.